Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for joining today's news conference. Bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Before we begin, I will note that some members of the panel will have to depart early to travel home. We will start out today with remarks from the Chair of the Council of the Federation, Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston. We will then take questions from the media. It is my pleasure to introduce the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston. Go ahead, Premier.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to beautiful Nova Scotia. As this year's Chair of the Council of the Federation, I'm proud to welcome provincial and territorial premiers to my home province. It's been fun to show off our province a little bit, and I look forward to bringing everyone and their families, hopefully, back this summer to really show them what we have to offer here in Nova Scotia. From our 13,000 kilometers of coastline to our own Napa Valley of the East to some of the best seafood in the world. There's lots to see and do in this province, and I hope we all get a chance to enjoy more of it next summer. But today was about getting to work. And first, I'd like to specifically welcome our new Premier to the table since our last COF meetings in July, Premier Wab Kinew. Welcome, Premier Kinew. Welcome to the team. Fit right in, for sure, I'd say. No matter where we live in our country, we're colleagues, and our focus is on solving the pressing challenges facing our citizens. There are incredible opportunities facing our country. We have so much to offer the world, incredible opportunities, but there are also significant shared challenges, especially related to housing and affordability and healthcare. And on the affordability file, one immediate action that we discussed as premiers that can be taken to address the affordability challenges is to ensure that all Canadians are treated fairly by the federal government when it comes to the federal carbon tax and home heating. And it's certainly not lost on our group that the Prime Minister has not convened a full in-person First Ministers meeting since 2018. So we again reiterate our call for a First Ministers meeting. The lack of collaboration to date on certain important specific issues has resulted in federal programs, particularly in housing, that create duplicate processes and really risk pitting provinces and territories against each other. This is not a good thing. It's not in the best interest of the Federation. So we ask the federal government to collaborate with the provinces, to collaborate with us, and work with us as active partners when developing and executing federal housing programs and other programs as well. This is an incredibly important point. It's so important, in fact, that today we also agreed to explore legislative options that would require provincial authorization before municipalities or public agencies can enter into any agreements with the federal government. That's a discussion that we're happy to have as a table to make sure that we're participating in those programs. Our housing and infrastructure issues can't be solved by the federal and municipal governments acting without meaningful involvement from provinces and territories. So we ask them to be respectful of that. It's time for everyone to come together for these discussions as regards housing, as regards infrastructure. And I'm pleased with the discussions that we had as a council around those issues. I'm also pleased with the discussion we had about healthcare best practices. We're each in our own respective provinces and territories taking innovative approaches to supporting our healthcare workers. We have incredible healthcare workers in the front lines every day serving Canadians. So we're all taking innovative approaches to supporting them and making sure that patients across the country have access to the care when they need it, where they need it. They have a right to expect that. So we know we can learn a lot from each other as we move forward. The Health Summit was held at the Nova Scotia Health Innovation Hub. This is an incredible space where brilliant minds really from across the world come together to innovate and find creative solutions for challenges facing healthcare. And we're getting those solutions in our innovation hub, and we're acting on some of them. And there's many more that are in the pipeline. So I was proud to highlight some of the work that's happening there. World-leading work being done by surgical robotics right here in Nova Scotia, led by Dr. Michael Dunbar. In addition, we had the team behind our new app, Your Health NS app, for a discussion with the table, and lots of interesting discussion around that. We also learned what other provinces are doing in the healthcare innovation space, including surgical centers, including more transparency for patients around physician wait lists, but other areas of the system as well, and discussions around technology and the use of technology, particularly some of the work that's being done for home virtual triage for people before they go to emergency departments. So there's good things happening across the country, important initiatives that will benefit patients. And that's what we want to learn from each other. So I'm optimistic that the lessons learned at this table will help all of us move a little quicker as we improve our healthcare systems. So I want to personally thank each premier for their passion for their home province and for their citizens. It is evident when we meet that they care about their constituents, but that we care about the country. So as we look forward, I'm confident that the important discussions that we continue to have will benefit all Canadians. So I want to thank everyone once again. Would now be pleased to take some questions.
Thank you, merci, Premier Houston. We will now move to media questions, starting with media who are present, followed by questions of those attending virtually. For members of the media attending virtually, you may press *1 at any time to add yourself to the queue. We'll now start with questions from media who are present in person. So please come to the microphone, state your name, your outlet, and direct your question to one premier, and you'll be limited to one question only.
Hi there, Kate McKenna, CBC National News. I guess my question is directed to the Premier of Manitoba. I read in the communique that the premiers are united on the carbon tax, but I'm just wondering if you're united in terms of asking for exemptions, and specifically, is Manitoba asking for an exemption on home heating fuels in your province?
Thank you for the question. I want to begin by acknowledging that it's great to be here on Mi'kma'ki, and I very much appreciate Premier Houston and the great people of Nova Scotia for hosting us in your beautiful province. I'm full of gratitude to be able to join these wonderful colleagues and work together on behalf of the people of Canada. I also, because this may be my last opportunity to speak in front of a national audience prior to Remembrance Day, I also want to take a moment to thank the veterans. As somebody who just went through an election recently, I'm very, very mindful of the sacrifices that the veterans of our great country have made so that each and every one of us can participate in this strong democracy. And so I really want to encourage folks, in addition to wearing a poppy and observing Remembrance Day this year, to also vote and engage in our democracy and pay tribute to the sacrifices that the veterans have made. In response to the question, I would say this. We all care about climate change. And I think we would love it if there were a silver bullet on climate change. But the carbon tax is not a silver bullet when it comes to climate change. Rather, it seems like it's going to be the hard work of many separate individual initiatives that is going to move the ball forward in terms of a climate-friendly future. And in Manitoba, we've put the down payment down over the last 50 years on having a low-carbon electricity grid. And we're very much, as a new government, excited to start building up the next steps of having a low-carbon jurisdiction with investments in critical minerals and hydrogen. But the reality is this. During this inflationary moment, right now, people are suffering. The temperatures are getting colder. It's probably not going to surprise any of my colleagues to hear that we've already had snow on the ground in Manitoba. But in light of that, we do think that there should be a similar consideration given to the people of Manitoba to get us through this period of economic pain.
So just to be clear, you're asking for a carve-out on home heating fuel for Manitoba as well?
Correct. And we have started this discussion weeks ago, prior to the recent flare-up in interest, I would say. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Wright. I'm with iPolitics. My question is about pharmacare. As you know, the federal Liberals and NDP are negotiating a bill on pharmacare right now. I'd like to know whether during your discussions, if this came up, what was discussed, and specifically what you would like to see in that bill. Perhaps Premier Houston, you could get us started. I'd also really like to hear from Premier Ford and Premier Hicks.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And we didn't have detailed, explicit discussions on pharmacare at today's meetings, but certainly we're all watching with interest. The cost of prescriptions, the cost of accessing healthcare for many Canadians is pretty punitive. So we're watching with interest to see what can come out of the discussions at the federal level, and we'll hope that it will be fair across the country and be in support of access to healthcare for all Canadians.
Well, we'd like to see what proposals the federal government has, and then we'll comment then.
Any other premiers that want to weigh in, please do.
Last name you asked for? Pardon? Rice.
Sorry. I just wanted to know whether what your thoughts were and,
Yes.
and what you would like to see in the
Fair.
pharmacare bill.
Fair enough. I just wasn't sure it was my name you called.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in relation to that, we didn't have any in-depth discussion on that at all during this session, but we're all kind of waiting for information and the details, because that's where it's going to land, and what impact it has, not only for better care, but also the impact on insurance companies that have today, insurance rates that are there today. And it's just one more thing to understand. Right now, we're trying to get better at healthcare. We're trying to really look at innovation across this country and find better ways to deliver the healthcare that we must. So adding something more to it right now, we really need to figure out how it's going to work before we just continue to load the system, because we're all talking healthcare because there's a need for changes.
Colton Perel, CTV News. On the issue of housing and specifically limiting unilateral discussions, is there concern that the federal government is overstepping through programs or undermining the provincial authority through programs like the Housing Accelerator Fund? And is there concern that you could potentially slow down funding by limiting those unilateral discussions? I direct it to you, Premier Ford, but I'd also like to hear from Premier Smith and Premier Eby as well, and anyone else who wants to comment on it.
Well, housing's a massive issue, not just in Ontario, but right across the entire country. I've always taken the approach, we have to take a collaborative approach, working with the municipalities and the province and the federal government. You know, all premiers would agree with this. You can't have the federal government going into a certain town or a certain city and dumping funding and not even discussing it with the province. That's unacceptable. We call it jurisdictional creep. Obviously, they don't want to work collaboratively when they do that. We do want to work collaboratively. We'll get a bigger bang for the buck for the people that need affordable, attainable homes, nonprofit homes, if we all work together. So we're encouraging the federal government, let's all work together. Let's look at federal lands, municipal lands, provincial lands, and we'll do a much better job for the people in need right now. So we look forward to hopefully them changing their mind, not surprising each and every one of us one morning when they're in ABC town dropping millions of dollars when that's not their jurisdiction. That's our jurisdiction. We welcome their help, and hopefully they'll put an end to this.
Well, it seems to be working for Quebec. They have a law, M30, which requires the federal government to negotiate with them directly rather than go through the municipalities. That's what we'll be looking at in our province. And you can't argue with success. They just announced $900 million for housing as a result of negotiating on behalf of all of their municipalities. And now all of their municipalities will have an equal opportunity to access those funds. What we're worried about, the last tranche of dollars that were announced for my province, were 14% of the population, and we got 2.5% of the funding. And so we need fairness, we need equity, and we're not seeing that with the current model. So if defending our jurisdiction by passing legislation similar to Quebec assists us in being able to get fair treatment, then that's what we're going to do.
I would just add, if I could, that I was very eager to talk about this at the table simply because a small jurisdiction like Prince Edward Island, made up of 68 or 70 communities of varying sizes, not many or any of our communities could handle a project without some provincial investment and assistance along the way. I think our country works best when we have partnerships. That I think in this regard, with the housing situation we face all across the country, we have willing partners with municipalities, with provinces, with the federal government. We're all working toward the same end. We should be able to work together to create a program that works for everybody. And I just think that when we talk about a lot of these discussions about housing or some of the other issues that we've talked about, underneath of it all is this Canadian unity debate. And I think if people continue to be excluded, it's really hard to talk about unity and how we can see this country being the best it can be. So I would encourage the federal government to not overlook the importance of provincial jurisdictions in this. We can all work together. We are working at breakneck speed to try to address this housing challenge. And we need to all be pulling on the same end of the rope here or we're not going to get there. So.
Je pourrais ajouter quelque chose. Que ce soit en matière de logement, en matière d'infrastructure, en matière de santé, comme le dit la première ministre Smith, on a une manière de faire au Québec qui permet de préserver nos champs de compétences et aujourd'hui, on a eu des discussions très intéressantes en Conseil de la Fédération. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup des collègues qui veulent s'inspirer de la manière de faire du Québec. C'est un message important qu'on envoie au gouvernement fédéral de respecter les champs de compétences, de privilégier les ententes bilatérales et de travailler en collaboration avec une grande flexibilité. Je pense que c'est la manière gagnante de travailler, puis on s'est entendu à ce sujet-là.
I should just mention we don't have translation.
Yeah, the translation didn't work. So.
But as part of Canada, it should be a bilingual country. So I think it's normal that I can speak in French during a federal council.
Hello, Premiers. Heidi Petracek, Global National. I direct this to Premier Higgs, although any Atlantic Premier who can weigh in, that would be much appreciated as well. If nothing changes with the carbon tax right now, how willing are you to implement it as it stands, to work with Ottawa and go ahead and do so with the plan?
Well, I think certainly in relation to the fairness across the for the kind of the rebate or the cancellation on heating oil and on all heating substances, that's just makes sense across the country. But I think it's time to have a real analytical approach to the effect of the carbon tax, and is it actually achieving what it was intended to do? And I would say no, it's not. We have a situation here where we have affordability kind of crisis across our country. We have a program that's kind of made in Canada that actually sticks to just Canada, and we're not recognizing the opportunity for Canada to be a major player to reduce emissions around the world by energy sources that are available here and that can reduce emissions in being them supplied. So I think it's time to have a real serious look at this carbon tax and what it has done, what it's doing, and the negative impact it's having, and to stop treating Canada like we're in a bubble and look at us as how we can make major impact on the world scene.
Happy to weigh in. I think my position on the carbon tax and its effectiveness in a province like Nova Scotia, it's not effective. There are much more effective ways to protect the planet. We all know our climate's changing. We all know that governments and citizens have a responsibility to preserve our planet for future generations, but we're most interested in doing that in the most effective way. So I don't think that's the carbon tax. I think they should get rid of the carbon tax and move on to working with us on other initiatives. In terms of the recent changes, I would say they have all Canadians have to heat their homes. So I'm sympathetic to the discussions. I understand the concerns of my colleagues from other parts of the country, and I would ask that the federal government address those concerns in a meaningful way. That's fair, but ultimately, I think they should just get rid of the carbon tax and work with the provinces on something that would actually help to preserve our planet.
From Newfoundland and Labrador's perspective, I mean, we've certainly made our position well known, whether it's on carbon tax or the clean fuels. I do think there deserves to be recognition on the Prime Minister's, for the Prime Minister recognizing that it disproportionately impacted Atlantic Canadians. That said, with every policy, policies are live documents that rightfully deserve repeat evaluations and repeat evaluations and repeat evaluations to see if they're achieving the goals they want and how they're impacting Canadians more broadly. From Newfoundland and Labrador's perspective, we were happy to see that there would be some relief given with respect to the home heating fuels. And make no mistake, there's 20%, 1 in 5 of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians still use that product. It's more expensive. It would have cost seniors on fixed incomes extra thousands of dollars at this time of inflationary pressure. All that said, we do think that this deserves a collaborative approach, and I'm very sensitive to the current Canadian dynamic and not inflaming a unity issue with respect to the energy file.
I just finished, Heidi, that I think this has been a really difficult issue to talk about publicly, because if you're in a jurisdiction such as ours and you talk about the impact of carbon tax, it can quickly get thrown back at you that you're some kind of climate change denier and this knuckle-dragging Neanderthal type personality, which I would say Prince Edward Islanders are not. I think we're an island province who understands climate change. We live it every day. And our position has been, since we became government in 2019, has been, rather than fight over these things, why can't we work on the shared goals together to reduce our carbon footprint and help islanders and Atlantic Canadians and Canadians in general live their lives as we work toward that transition? And that's what we've tried to do. This latest situation with the federal government, it didn't have to happen the way it did. I think if cooler heads could have prevailed, and if we just could have got away from this very rigid political doctrine that we have to do this and it has to be across the board for this broad country that we have that's so diverse and different, I think we could have avoided this outcome. But as islanders, I think we want to play our role in the reduction of carbon and making our future better and greener and cleaner. And we've been just asking all along to have a willing partner with the federal government in that process with some real solutions, which we have been working on for almost 5 years.
Thanks. I just want to weigh in. This had the potential to be a very divisive conversation around the table. Our jurisdictions have different perspectives on how to address climate change. But the discussion was grounded in our shared concerns around affordability for the people we represent and fairness, fair treatment for all Canadians. And I certainly very much appreciate that. I want to be clear, though, from the British Columbia perspective, the big impact on taxpayers has been we spent $1 billion fighting forest fires this year. We will spend well in excess of $1 billion addressing atmospheric rivers, floods in the Fraser Valley. We had a heat dome that killed hundreds of people. We had pine beetle overwintering that has decimated our forest industry. We have a massive investment to make in adaptation around dikes to prevent flooding, around communities to prevent forest fires from burning down whole towns like it did Lytton, like it threatened to do Kelowna. And it's just devastating in British Columbia climate change-wise. And no province should expect to be exempt from those kinds of climate impacts. For us, the carbon tax has been an effective mechanism to reduce carbon pollution. Since 2017, our emissions have gone down despite a dramatic increase in population. And since the inception of the carbon tax, we've seen those kinds of impact. But the tax has been about ensuring people are protected rather than particular heat sources. So I brought a T-shirt with me here about my enthusiasm for the federal government's heat pump program in Atlantic Canada, and how much I hope that it comes to British Columbia in the same way for the 30,000 people who get that feeling in the pit of their stomach when they hear the fuel pump truck when they hear the fuel truck pull up to fill up their tank and they know a bill's coming in the mail that they can barely afford. We all share that concern. We all have different approaches to address climate change. We all understand the priority, and the fact that we can agree to disagree on some issues and still push forward on that, I'm very appreciative of.
I would add to this as well from the perspective of Saskatchewan, and I would encourage Atlantic premiers, Premier Eby, anyone else, and possibly even Saskatchewan for the small number of folks that utilize home heating oil, of which we've largely transitioned. But the program is fine, and I think that premiers and provinces that can sign up for this particular program where heat pumps can be useful, you should most certainly sign up for it. And so we may have different views with respect to what is the most effective tool to reduce emissions in our area of the nation, in the products that we produce and provide to the world in our case. That's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about fairness for Canadian families. And so if you walk back in time, there's jurisdictions up here that have made significant investments in hydropower, for example, and other types of electricity that are available for their residents. In the early 80s, what we made the investment in Saskatchewan was converting from home heating oil to natural gas to the degree of about 85% of Saskatchewan residents now utilize natural gas, and they deserve to be treated fairly with respect to the carbon tax, the Canadian carbon tax policy as well. And so the issue isn't the policy, it's how the policy is being applied, and up until now largely has been somewhat fairly applied across the nation. I don't think anyone can say this today. And we have said that if the federal government isn't going to extend that carbon tax pause to the other forms of home heating oil, we do have a Crown utility in Saskatchewan, and we will extend that pause to those folks that utilize natural gas in Saskatchewan. That'll extend to about 85% of our residents. Largely, the folks that don't use natural gas are using propane or are using electrical heat, and they're largely in rural, northern, and often Indigenous communities. And so we're going to be looking carefully at our power utility that we have as a Crown utility as well. Is there an opportunity for us to extend that even beyond natural gas to electrical heat in the province, making the very same decision at the provincial level for our residents? That being said, that would still leave out potentially all of those northern Indigenous and rural communities that might use propane. And so the right thing to do, we feel, is for the Canadian government to extend fairness to all Canadian families, is to yes, extend this carbon tax pause to home heating oil, but also extend it to other forms of electricity, propane, other forms of heating sources that we are using across this nation. Saskatchewan made that investment some 35, 40 years ago. Other provinces have made those investments in other areas. I would just add to this, by the very metrics of home heating oil being dirtier than other forms, and by the affordability crisis that we are discussing here today, the same would hold true for coal and natural gas-fired power in Saskatchewan. It is the dirtiest way to generate power today. We're in the process of planning our transition away from that, but we're being charged the carbon tax on that form of what is heating close to 15% of the homes in our province. By the same metrics, the solution would be to pause the carbon tax on coal and natural gas-fired power, and then provide the province of Saskatchewan or other provinces with the investment to transition away from that. And that isn't happening, but it does so to some degree just speak to the inherent unfairness of the decision that has been made. And I would ask the federal government respectfully to revisit this decision. Don't send a minister out that is going to spread divisions on how many you have elected from one party or the other across this nation, and how that might impact a decision that this federal government makes, to actually revisit this decision with an eye to being fair to all Canadian families.
And I would just say that Alberta has a similar history to Saskatchewan, having taken great effort many years ago to convert to natural gas home heating. But in addition, the early phase out of coal, which has cost our province literally billions of dollars to do it 7 years early, only to be surprised by additional taxes being levied at the federal level. We believe very strongly that natural gas should be treated as a cleaner fuel. We know that the export of LNG internationally is going to be able to reduce dirtier fuels, coal and wood and dung. And in fact, we've already seen what happens in jurisdictions that don't have access to clean natural gas. They convert back to coal. So if this is truly a global problem, then we need global thinking and global solutions. And we should be exporting more of our cleaner fuel to reduce global emissions and not punish punishing our customers here at home. It's not our customers' fault that the alternatives are not available to them. I do not share David Eby's, Premier Eby's enthusiasm for heat pumps, because in our province they don't work particularly well at below -25. You can't get insurance without having a backup to your heat pump, and so it's not really a credible option in our province. There may be other options that emerge in future with technology, but in the meantime, all this is doing is just causing unfairness, making life less affordable, and really harming our most vulnerable as we get into the winter season.
Jean Laroche, CBC Nova Scotia. Before you all met, Premier Houston talked about provinces recruiting in other provinces to try and fill gaps in healthcare, and I wondered if, first of all, Premier Houston, did you bring it to the table? And if you did, if I could hear from some of the other premiers, how would that work or not in practical terms?
Thanks very much for the question. And we know that one of the challenges in healthcare is that healthcare human resources having enough healthcare professionals to meet the needs of Canadians and Nova Scotians and our respective citizens. So we know that the human resources is a big issue. Recruitment, retention. We did have a discussion about recruitment. For me personally, recruiting healthcare workers that are already working in another province or jurisdiction and trying to province or territory and trying to recruit them to leave that and come to Nova Scotia, that's not something that we will continue to do in Nova Scotia. I do understand, it's kind of common practice for people for post-secondary institutions to have job fairs and for all kinds of companies and jurisdictions to have representation at those job fairs to say what it is they have to offer, whether it's in terms of quality of life, whether it's in terms of beauty of their province, or just how their healthcare system is working. So I think what I accept the argument that recruiting at post-secondary institutions is something that people will continue to do. But actively recruiting healthcare workers that are already working and engaged in a healthcare system is something that Nova Scotia is not going to do, and I'll let my colleagues weigh in. But I think there was some consensus about that aspect of it, trying to recruit workers who are actively working in a healthcare system somewhere. How it's policed, how it works. I mean, I think really at this stage it was just a discussion about how do we support each other, and the healthcare summit was really about finding ways to support each other, to support our own citizens, whether it's through innovative approaches, whether it's through technology, certainly about healthcare human resources. So trying to poach workers from another jurisdiction is not really supporting each other, and I think I'll let my colleagues speak to that, but I think there was some agreement on that aspect of it.
Yeah, certainly there was a bit of a tit for tat between Newfoundland and Labrador and Saskatchewan. There's no question about it. A couple of months ago, but I think having talked to Premier Moe privately and amongst the group, we all recognize that healthcare professionals right now are in high demand. They're very mobile, and but Canada has an absolute imperative to continue to provide top-notch care in our own jurisdiction, and robbing Peter to pay Paul does not help advance that agenda in any way, shape, or form. So I think there was a significant unity amongst ourselves to prevent an aggressive, active recruitment campaign in other people's backyards. That said, one component of healthcare professional mobility that we did tackle, and we would like to see a unified front and a unified approach, a unified strategy, if you will, is how we limit agency nurses. Because right now we have nurses moving from one province to the other fairly quickly, fairly easily, both providing Band-Aid style care while also hurting the treasury of the province that they're moving from as well. So all of us are experiencing that. I'm sure there's agency nurses from Newfoundland and Labrador and British Columbia. There's some from British Columbia, Newfoundland and Labrador, and it keeps going. That does not help advance anybody's care, nor does it help advance the system.
And I would just add to that as well. The goal here, and always has been, in particular, I would say with the conversations that we've had post-pandemic, have been about how do we work together to actively build a stronger healthcare system nationally by strengthening each of the provincial or territorial healthcare systems that we have. There was some discussion here maybe a month or so ago, Premier, between Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. I quickly had reached out to Premier Fury where we had a discussion about recruiting teams being at post-secondary job fairs, for example, which are providing options for our graduates, to where they might work in Canada versus potentially actively recruiting healthcare professionals that are working in other areas. And I think we've sorted that out for certain between the two provinces. And I think we had a healthy discussion about that today and how we are all working together to build that stronger national healthcare system. Working together globally, for example, in attracting and streamlining the opportunities that global healthcare folks would have to locate in one of our provinces or territories, to working alongside one another in the training opportunities that we have. That certainly builds a stronger national healthcare system. And today, a lot of the discussion was around sharing efficiencies and best practices that we have in implementing technological assistance or solutions that would help our healthcare employees across Canada ultimately deliver better care. And so a good discussion, I think, in fairness, started with Premier Fury and myself, but extended to this table very quickly.
Just want to, just take a moment to thank Premier Houston. Even in the north, we're in a position where, of course, recruitment can be challenging, but I think it's important to focus and really respect frontline workers and their ability to have mobility. I want to thank the Atlantic premiers for the invite to the northern premiers this summer and the potential collaboration on the Atlantic Registry for Doctors. And as well to Premier Houston this summer. We're on the other side of the country, being in the Yukon, but having an opportunity to focus on recognition of foreign credential. I think that's really where we have to be. We have to grow our own healthcare workers at home in each province and territory, but there are solutions. But it's really going to be about effective foreign credential recognition and streamlining best practices throughout. So again, it's not about poaching anybody else's healthcare workers, but it's about supporting each other on how to streamline getting people to the front line.
And I'll also thank Premier Houston. He introduced us to an individual who's had quite a bit of success in recruiting from the Philippines to bring more nurses into the system, I believe in the long-term care area. We're working on that same kind of approach. So I suspect what you'll see is the Premier's working very diligently and collaboratively to try to recruit from abroad, whether it's Philippines or another nation, and then also working on foreign credentials recognition, as well as recognizing the credentials across the country so that there is the ability to move seamlessly between jurisdictions. And we are working on enhancing the number of spaces that are available in our institutions, training more medical professionals in rural communities so they stay in rural communities. We're hoping to be able to grow our own supply here. And one other thing that we did talk about is the reason why medical professionals are compelled to go either locum or agency nurses, and do we need to do some work on addressing some of the working conditions that our nurses and doctors find themselves in our hospitals. In Alberta, I discovered that the last Council of the Federation meeting, we only have 38% of our nurses willing to work full-time. So perhaps addressing some of the reasons why nurses don't want to take on full-time positions may be a solution without having to go and recruit from other provinces.
The healthcare human resource challenge is significant across Canada, and in Manitoba it's particularly acute because we have a workforce that has been dealing with all sorts of challenges for the past number of years, which were then just compounded by the impacts of the pandemic. So I think one of the things that I brought forward, and I was very happy to hear colleagues bring forward as well, is our appreciation for those folks who work on the front lines of our healthcare system. We celebrate you, we value you, we thank you, and we need you to keep working on the front lines of our healthcare system. I want to thank Premier Houston for the discussion on the health summit portion of this, because we're able to hear some interesting ideas that are being pursued across Canada. And the examples that I chose to share from Manitoba are actually innovations that started on the front lines. And I think some of the great ideas from Cancer Care Manitoba or from the First Nations COVID Task Force that I'm sharing are important, because if we want to keep healthcare professionals, nurses, physicians engaged and working on the front lines, we need a comprehensive approach, which includes, of course, compensation. It includes better working conditions. But it also should include those sort of North Stars that we can affix ourselves to and motivate the next generation of young people in this country to say, I want to work in healthcare. And so I think the discussion that we had over the past couple of days was very helpful in helping us to articulate what is that future vision of healthcare going to look like to motivate somebody who's in high school, somebody who's in university today, to join the front lines. And I'm very encouraged by the conversation that happened with respect to potentially looking at agency nurses as a next step, with looking at ensuring that we're not poaching staff from neighboring jurisdictions, because to me this is a genesis at the provincial level, being led by provincial and territorial leaders, of an approach to addressing the health challenges that all Canadians face. And the reason why I think that that's so significant is in the absence of that sort of collaboration, we may compete against one another into a future in which none of us can afford to staff our healthcare systems, in which none of us can sustainably do so. And so I do want to really highlight the work that was done around the table over the past couple of days, because I do think that these sorts of conversations are really going to move the needle in terms of improving healthcare for people across Canada, and certainly are going to be well, I think, received by those on the front lines, including in Manitoba.
That's all the time we have today. C'est tout le temps dont nous disposons aujourd'hui. Thank you for joining us. Merci de vous être joints à nous.